Welcome to the summary of the Food Web unit. My name is Switgard Duesterloh. I'm the director of the Ocean Science Discovery Program. We started the program in 2008, and ever since we have been bringing marine science content into classrooms in the Kodiak School District. Today, I'm going to summarize a little bit what you learned with Sarah and Theo earlier about the food web in the ocean. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some photographs and make a little food web on our whiteboard here behind me. And you can see that up here, there's a big sun up there. So everything starts with the sunlight. The sunlight gives our ocean food web the energy. At one of our stations, you learned about some organisms that need sunlight to grow. And there were seaweeds, and there were also those tiny algae, those phytoplankton that you looked at under the microscope. We'll start with a seaweed called the kelp today. I'll put the kelp up here, and the kelp needs nutrients and water and sunlight to grow. So now let's think about an organism that eats kelp. Some of you may have suggested a sea urchin, and I have the test or the shell of a sea urchin right here. When there's a kelp growing like this on the bottom of the ocean, the sea urchin will use its little jaws to gnaw on the kelp and eat that little stipe away until that kelp floats away. So sea urchins like to eat kelp. When you look at this sea urchin, there's a hole in it. Somebody ate it. There's a story with this sea urchin. One day I walked out into my backyard and suddenly a sea urchin, this sea urchin, fell on the grass right in front of me. And I looked up and there was a raven in the tree. And that raven had found the sea urchin probably on the beach, had eaten it, and the shell it carried around and dropped it in my backyard. So ravens like eating sea urchins. And now we have a little food chain. We have a raven that ate a sea urchin, which ate the kelp, which used the sunlight to grow. That's a very simple and very short food chain. Let's try another one. This time we're going to start with diatoms. Remember, diatoms and dinoflagellates were some of the kinds of phytoplankton in the ocean. So diatoms also use sunlight and nutrients to grow. Now there are organisms that love to eat diatoms, and you looked at those, or Theo looked at those under the microscope. We call those zooplankton. They are animals that live in the plankton, and they eat the phytoplankton, which are plants that live in the plankton. When you have an organism that only uses the sunlight to grow, we call these producers. Everything that eats either a producer or somebody else, some other animal, are called consumers. So we have here a first level consumer called a copepod. Copepods are small animals in the plankton, about the size of a grain of rice, and they are very common. And many things eat copepods. So one of the things that eats copepods is a barnacle. You've all probably seen barnacles on the beach. Usually they are up above the tide line. That is to avoid predators, and we'll talk about that in a moment. A barnacle is related to shrimp. It's a shrimp that basically glues its head to the bottom of a rock, or to a rock. And then it builds a house around itself, a strong shell, so it can't be eaten as easily. And then it sits in there and kicks its little legs into the current and catches the diatoms and the copepods out of the water. Guess what the next question is? Who eats a barnacle? Now, the reason that most barnacles live so far up out of the water, where during low tide they are actually falling dry, is to get away from their predators. And their strongest predator is the sea star. Sea stars cannot spend a lot of time outside of the water. They always need to be wet. That's because sea stars don't have blood. They use the ocean water actually instead of blood to get oxygen throughout their body. The way a sea star eats is by extruding a stomach into its prey, like a barnacle, a smaller one, of course. Then it digests the prey inside its own shell and then sucks that stomach back into its own body and uses the nutrients. So a sea star could eat barnacles. Now, there aren't a lot of animals that eat sea stars. Sea stars are not very nutritious. Sometimes we see seagulls kind of pecking on them, eating a little bit, but even they soon get disinterested. Sometimes sea otters will eat sea stars if they are desperate for food. So I have a sea otter here, and sea otters are hungry animals. They eat a lot of different things. They could eat a sea star. They could also, one of their favorite foods actually, are sea urchins. So I could also have my sea otter here. My sea otter could be the top of either one of these two food chains. So they kind of connect these two food chains. Let's try another one. And I will once again use the diatoms to start with. The diatoms that need sunlight to grow. And this time I'm going to use a different kind of plankton. This is called a krill. It's also a very common plankton. And something that eats copepods or krill and is very important and very common in our ocean is the herring. Herring are a small fish. Well, they get to about this size, but they start small and they have a very high lipid content, which means they are very fat. You could think about them as the French fry of the ocean. A lot of things love to eat herring. One of the animals that likes to eat herring, and granted they can only eat them before they are fully grown, when they're kind of smaller, is a salmon. I have a silver salmon here. So salmon eat herring, which eat krill, which eat diatoms, which need sunlight and nutrients to grow. And who likes to eat salmon? So usually when there's a classroom here, a lot of kids say, I do, I do, I do. I like eating salmon. So that just shows us that the marine food webs is really important for people too. Another animal that also likes to eat salmon and sometimes competes with a salmon fisherman is a sea lion. Seals and sea lions, they love salmon. And here in Kodiak, the kids know very well another animal that lives on the land and depends on salmon, and that's the bear. We have the Kodiak brown bear here in Kodiak, and they love to eat salmon as well. So many animals depend on these food chains, on these ocean food chains. It's not just the herring that want to eat that plankton. When you're on the beach, you probably have seen bivalves, little mussels, blue mussels, that are also filtering the water and eating the diatoms. This is the last food chain I'm going to put up here. So blue mussels are closely related also to clams. I don't have a picture of a clam, but clams are important food for many animals, for people, for sea otters again, for a lot of fish. So lots of things. You might actually go back into this food chain. Fish eat the clams. One animal that eats mussels or clams is also a snail. This is a whelk, and a whelk is a predatory snail that can drill a little hole into the shell of a blue mussel and then eat that mussel. So I'm going to put the whelk right here. And what eats a whelk? Well, I have seen ravens pick up whelks and throw them onto the road to crack their shells and then eat them. I also know that crabs sometimes eat snails. So what I'm going to put up here is a picture of a king crab. Here I have a mold of a king crab. King crabs are very, very important commercially. People love eating king crabs. King crabs are very, very expensive to get, and they are considered a delicacy. Now, in the animal kingdom, of course, something that tastes good, a lot of animals like to eat too. And guess who likes to eat king crabs? Our sea otter. Sea otters eat lots of things. They love crabs. Our sea lion might eat a king crab. Our bear probably won't find one. People like king crabs. If the raven were ever to get one, it would eat that too. But another animal that really, really likes crabs is an octopus. My little octopus helper here. So octopus really like to eat crabs as well. And who likes to eat an octopus? Sea otters eat lots of things. They like octopus. Our sea lion might eat an octopus. A bear might eat an octopus if it ever got one. That's not very likely, but only if the octopus comes high up on the beach. So what you can see here is that many animals cross over from one food chain to another. And all these food chains are connected into a big food web. If a key animal, like for example the herring, were affected by some catastrophe, let's say a disease, after the Exxon Valdez oil spill back in 1989 in Prince William Sound, Alaska, the herring were affected by the oil and they became sick. And for several years, there were hardly any herring in Prince William Sound. So if you lose a key species like this, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the coho? What are they going to do? They will not find their prey. So they may have to go looking for something else to eat. And if they can't find enough other things to eat, there may be fewer coho salmon. If there are fewer coho salmon, the sea lions are going to have to look for something else to eat. And the bears are going to have to look for something else to eat. If they don't find much else, there will be fewer sea lions, fewer bears, or they have a harder time in the next year making their pups. On the other hand, the things that were eaten by the herring, there are going to be more of these. So we'll have more zooplankton. So it works both ways. Now also, if we have fewer salmon, that's not good for us, right? For the salmon fishery, for the people. In summary, we can say that the marine food web is really important for everybody, for all the animals in the ocean, for some of the animals that are not in the ocean, like the bears and the ravens, and for the people. Thank you for listening, and I hope you had a lot of fun watching this video. Thank you.